Greetings, Scotty Reed here with a Black Talk Radio News report and commentary. And this particular report and commentary will be a moment in time that happened during the DNC debates that was hosted by CNN and the New York Times. I thought something that has never been uttered on a debate stage among presidential candidates occurred that has never occurred. I mean, it was like it went over everyone's head because I don't see anyone else talking about it. No one else is tweeting about it. But what we heard from Tulsi Gabbard, a presidential candidate, and she's also a representative in Congress, is unprecedented. She said the United States arms terrorists for regime change. I repeat, Tulsi Gabbard, a member of different foreign relations committees and what have you, armed services committee, who is also active duty. Well, I'm not sure about active duty. I think she's in the National Guard or something to that effect because she's also serving in Congress. But she is a commissioned officer in the U.S. military, and she's an acting U.S. representative. And so this woman said that the United States arms terrorists for regime change in different parts of the world. Now, this goes back to the last video podcast that I made, and the title of that is What's Really Going On in Syria with the Kurds. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But she is just confirming the things that I was showing you in that last video. So let's roll the tape on this unprecedented moment in presidential debate history from Tulsi Gabbard.
The slaughter of the Kurds being done by Turkey is yet another negative consequence of the regime change war that we've been waging in Syria. Donald Trump has the blood of the Kurds on his hand, but so do many of the politicians in our country from both parties who have supported this ongoing regime change war in Syria that started in 2011. New York Times and CNN have also smeared veterans like myself for calling for an end to this regime change war. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times put out an article saying that I'm a Russian asset and an Assad apologist and all these different smears. This morning, a CNN commentator said on national television that I'm an asset of Russia. Completely despicable. And I would make sure that we stop supporting terrorists like al-Qaeda in Syria, who've been the ground force in this ongoing regime change war. I'd like to ask Senator Warren if she would join me in calling for an end to this regime change war in Syria, finally.
Okay, let's stop the tape right there. So that's the first instance of Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who I hope when Bernie Sanders wins the nomination and goes on to defeat Donald Trump and becomes the next commander-in-chief, that he will appoint Tulsi Gabbard as his Secretary of State. As I was just recounting on social media earlier, when I first went into the military, Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense and Ronald Reagan was the Commander-in-Chief. I would not mind serving, if I was going to serve, under a commander-in-chief like Bernie Sanders with a Secretary of Defense in Tulsi Gabbard. Now, the only reason I went into the military or pimped myself out to the U.S. war machine was for college money. So if Bernie Sanders had been president, hopefully we would have had the College for All Act and I wouldn't have had to pimp myself out in such a manner. But that's the first instance that she called. And you saw Elizabeth Warren. She basically was flabbergasted, didn't have an answer. And I will point out, nobody pushed back on that. And I thought it was interesting that they had former CIA intern Anderson Cooper asking the question about foreign policy and what you would do differently than Trump as it relates to the Kurds in Syria. And she rightly pointed out that, first of all, I would have never had the U.S. troops there trying to overthrow the U.S. government. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But again, I believe this is the first time in presidential debate history that a candidate for president has acknowledged that the United States government arms terrorists to take out other countries, i.e., Libya is the most recent example of that. I only mention Libya because they were successful in murdering Gaddafi and a whole bunch of black Africans in 2011 using these jihadists and what have you. So that was the first instance of her pointing out that the U.S. government has been arming terrorists. Now, here is the second instance where she's calling out another veteran, Pete Buttigieg, on the same issue. And she mentions for the second time, with no pushback from the moderators, no follow-up questions, nothing from the other candidates. I mean, they chimed in whenever they felt like they wanted to chime in, but they were all awfully quiet when Tulsi Gabbard, U.S. Representative Tulsi Gabbard, said the United States government has been arming terrorists. So let's roll the rest of the tape.
So really what you're saying, Mayor Pete, is that you would continue to support having U.S. troops in Syria for an indefinite period of time to continue this regime change war that has caused so many refugees to flee Syria, that you would continue to have our country involved in a war that has undermined our national security. You would continue this policy of the U.S. actually providing arms and support to terrorist groups in Syria, like Al-Qaeda, HTS, al-Nusra, and others, because they are the ones who have been the ground force in this regime change war. That's really what you're saying.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Now, she did get some pushback, but not from the mainstream media, but she got it from Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks. But nobody else really questioned her on whether or not the U.S. government is arming terrorists in the Middle East, in North Africa, to foment regime change. So let me pull up what Anna Kasparian said on Twitter. And it's not about the U.S. arming terrorists. This is what Anna Kasparian had to say. Gabbard is lying. U.S. troops in northern Syria weren't there for a regime change war. They were there to deter Turkish aggression against Kurdish allies until there was a safe zone created. Her dishonesty here is gross. Now, if the U.S. government announced some policy that, hey, we're sending troops to Syria to put them on the border between the Kurds and the Turkey government, and there to be human shields, human shields, y'all know what that term is, human shields for the Kurds. This is the first time I've heard of it, and I have been doing Black Talk Radio News and running the Black Talk Radio Network, but I specifically focus on politics and social issues. And I've been doing that since 2008. So I keep up with these issues. This is my job. This is what the donors to the nonprofit Black Talk Media Project have allowed me to do for going on. In November, it'll be 11 years where I have the time to research this and pull them receipts up. Now, speaking of receipts, let me pull out a receipt for Anna Kasparian. Now, this is the headline of an article that came out in 2016 called Hillary the Hawk, and it came from foreignpolicy.com. Hillary the Hawk, a history from Haiti to Syria, the Democratic candidate's long record suggests she's looking forward to being a war president on day one. Now, this was published on July the 27th, 2016. Okay, now let's go to an excerpt. Now, they cover about 4 or 5 different regime change plots that Hillary was leading while she was in the Obama administration. And this is what the excerpt says. Syria. In 2012, she repeatedly proposed to the White House along with CIA David Petraeus. Y'all remember him, right? They was calling him David Betrayus. a covert program, apparently larger than the one later authorized, to provide arms to vetted Syrian rebel groups fighting Bashar al-Assad's government. Obama opposed this proposal on the grounds that there could be no guarantee of where the weapons will ultimately end up, and that CIA analysts determined they would not have materially hastened the removal of Assad from power. It is difficult to assess the CIA-led, trained, and equipped program's effectiveness compared to larger Defense Department-led efforts, but there remains no collection of U.S.-backed rebel groups that has threatened the existence of the Assad government, which is now backed by indiscriminate Russian air power. So there you go. From 2016, that's an article from foreignpolicy.com in 2016, citing that the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton leading the charge, and David Petraeus at the CIA leading the charge to arm quote-unquote vetted Syrian rebels. Now, again, going back to my last video, I showed you a BBC published map that showed so-called Syrian rebels surrounded by so-called jihadists, as they were calling them. And I'm like, well, where are the news reports about U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces being surrounded by ISIS? You're not hearing any of that. Okay, you're not hearing any of that. But I'm not going to rehash my last video podcast. You can go check it out. So there's your receipts, Anna Kasparian, that Tulsi Gabbard knows what she's talking about. She knows better than you. Again, she sits on all of these relevant committees during her time in Congress, which I think has been 7 years. Okay, she's actually active duty, or not active duty, but reserve in the U.S. military reserves. And it's not just her, but this has long been known. I mean, if you go look at the videos of them terrorists killing and murdering Gaddafi, of which Hillary Clinton laughed and said, we saw he died trying to play herself up to be, what's his name, Julius Caesar like, and what have you. What were they yelling? Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. From her emails, we know that these terrorists was targeting black people because they thought that Gaddafi favored black Africans over Arabs. And so they, rightly or wrongly, they started targeting these people, just murdering anybody based on their skin color. And Sidney Blumenthal, who wasn't even part of the U.S. government, but apparently was Hillary Clinton's point person in Libya, and he was told by one of those militia commanders that that's what his troops was doing. And Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration did nothing. Okay? So again, I've only been paying the politics since the late 80s. 87 is when I went into the U.S. military and figured, these people had the power to send me off to die or be maimed and to kill people. So I better pay attention to politics. And so I can't recall any other time on a debate stage for presidential candidates, a candidate acknowledging that the United States government arms terrorists to take out other countries. First time in history. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think so. This has been Scotty Reed with a Black Talk Radio News Report and commentary. Please support the production of independent black media. I stress independent, by making a tax-deductible donation to the Black Talk Media Project. Peace and blessings to all.